questions. Questions orales. The honourable member for Thornhill.
6 out of 10 Canadian families heat their homes with natural gas, which Canada is refusing to develop. Thousands of dollars more spent on home heating bills for Canadian families this winter, and billions in the hands of warmongers. And to top it all off, they plan on tripling the carbon tax while failing to hit a single emissions target. Instead of hitting Canadians with their punishing tax plan, why not develop clean Canadian energy and give Canadians an environmental plan that actually works?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister.
Madam Speaker, today is Friday, and so I want to start with some very good news for hardworking Canadian families. Yesterday night, Bill C-31 received royal. That is good news because it means Canadians struggling to pay their rent will soon be getting checks for $500. That is real help. It also means that Canadian kids under 12 will be able to go to the dentist.
Honourable member for Thornhill.
That's not an answer to my question, so I'm going to try again. There are few countries on Earth that could displace more coal with natural gas than we can. Instead of developing our own resources to actually fight climate change, they are tripling the carbon tax, freezing Canadians in the winter, and starving families so they have to go to food banks. This government keeps the world burning the worst fossil fuels. Canada ranks 58 out of 63 countries on emissions. Wake up, Liberals. This is a tax plan. Canadians know it. Does she?
The Honourable Deputy, the Honourable Minister.
Madam Speaker, I'd like to thank my colleague for a very important question, actually. Madam Speaker, probably she noticed that just last week, we announced in Canada the largest hydrogen plant in the world, Madam Speaker.
That's great.
And this happened in Edmonton with Air Products, a $1.7 billion investment, Madam Speaker, which will make Edmonton, Alberta, the key place in North America when it comes to hydrogen, Madam Speaker. That's how you build the future.
Excellent work, Francois.
The Honourable member for Thornhill.
Would have built some LNG, anything in the last 7 years. The Germans went to Australia for a 16-year LNG agreement. They went to the UAE, extended their agreement. They bought more from the US. They could have gotten it here from Canada, but the Prime Minister sent the German Chancellor home empty-handed. Then the finance minister realized that he had made a mistake. She said that she was going to expedite projects. So I have a few questions for her. Which projects will she expedite? What are the rules? And when will we know?
The Honourable Minister.
Madam Speaker, I'd like to again remind my colleague what we did when the German Chancellor was in Canada. Not only we talked about hydrogen, which Canadians have seen on the East Coast and across Canada, but we also signed two important things, Madam Speaker. We signed an MOU with Volkswagen and Mercedes-Benz, Madam Speaker, to look at the future and how we can work closer together with our German friends when it comes to industry. And Madam Speaker, in about 2 weeks, I'll be at the board of both Volkswagen and Mercedes-Benz to make the case for Canada. We should all work together to make the case for Canada. Thank you.
Excellent work.
L'honorable député de Mégantic.
The honourable member for Mégantic-L'Érable. Thank you, Madam Speaker. In Quebec, more and more people are skipping a meal or barely eating at all because they can't afford increasingly expensive food. Quebec's Public Health Institute revealed this week that the number of people suffering from moderate to severe food insecurity rose from 8 to 15% from 2020 to 2022. Why do the Liberals want to raise taxes when people can't even get enough to eat? The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister. Thank you for the question. Madam Speaker, I am fully aware of the struggles of many Canadians with the high cost of living today. And that's why I am so happy today to be able to share some good news. And that is that last night, Bill C-31 got royal assent. That will have specific and major consequences for Canadians, for the less advantaged. The honourable member for Mégantic-L'Érable. Madam Speaker, I'm talking about pregnant mothers who are finding it increasingly hard to get essential food for their pregnancies. The Olo Foundation reported a 32% increase in demand for eggs, 20% for milk, and 27% for vegetables. 1/3 of the 671,000 people using food banks are kids. 1 in 2 food insecure people have employment income. And the Liberals, in spite of this, they want to dig even deeper into Canadians' pockets. What's it going to take for the Liberals to realize what's going on and that it's time to stop raising taxes? The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister. Madam Speaker, we understand that Canadian families, Canadian mothers, are having difficulties today. And that's why we decided to send $500 to vulnerable families having trouble paying their rent. And that's why we decided to pay for dental care for all Canadian kids. The only thing I don't understand, Madam Speaker, is why the Conservatives voted against those things. They're so important to Canadians today. The Honourable Member for Joliette. Madam Speaker, the federal government is threatening to deprive our cities of $2.7 billion for infrastructure. They're moving up the deadline for Quebec to submit projects from 2025 to next March. Otherwise, they will pocket the money. The Liberals have changed the date unilateral, and then they have the nerve to accuse Quebec of leaving federal money on the table. 1, it's not their money, it's Quebecers' money. And 2, they're not dragging their feet. They're the ones who changed the date and then are blustery. Why not respect the date and cooperate instead of threatening important projects for our cities?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. You know, one of the things that needs to be recognized is never before in the history of Canada have we seen a government that has invested so much in infrastructure from every region of our country. And Madam Speaker, we want to continue to work with the different stakeholders, our provinces, municipalities, in order to get shovels in the ground. In regards to the very specifics, I'll be sure to ensure that the Minister is, I'm sure, very much aware of the situation.
The Honourable Member for Joliette. Well, then they should come back to the original date. The federal government obviously doesn't understand what moving up the date by 2 years means. Their role is limited to announcing the money and showing up at the ribbon cutting. But on the ground, there's a shortage of manpower in construction. Contractors have too many orders. Most cities don't have anyone to produce estimates, and that's what planning infrastructure projects is all about for the people who build them. That's why the Union of Municipalities is asking that the agreed-upon date of 2025 be respected. Will the government come back to reality and listen to our cities? The Honourable Minister. Madam Speaker, I'd like to thank my colleague for this important question. I think my colleague will agree that if ever there was a government that worked well with the municipalities, including those in Quebec, it's the Liberal government, Madam Speaker. As the former Minister of Infrastructure, I can say that we've always been listening to what the needs are. And whenever there's a construction season, we've always worked hand in hand with the municipality. That's the way we operate, and that's how we will continue to operate. And I would encourage my colleague to continue asking those questions so that we can work in the best interests of Quebec's municipalities. Thank you. The Liberals have been failing veterans for years. The minister refuses to hire staff, and now he's outsourcing the job to a private company for hundreds of millions of dollars. It's not even clear they'll be able to provide adequate services in French. Veterans want people who can serve them better, not a company whose top priority is profit. When will the minister do the right thing and help veterans and their families, and not the already rich CEOs?
Honourable Minister for Veterans.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm surprised to hear a question from my honourable colleague. The fact is, we have a new contract that will go in effect at the end of November. It has 9,000 health professionals in 600 locations right across the country. What we are doing as a government is providing the services for veterans where veterans need the services. It would be totally irresponsible to cancel that contract. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for New Westminster Burnaby.
Our nation's veterans deserve respect, and that answer was anything but, Madam Speaker. Suspension of services are happening now. There's no transition plan, and they're outsourcing contracts to a company owned by none other than Loblaws. This boondoggle will cost 25% more than just adequately funding the department. Liberals want to spend more money for fewer services. Why is the minister putting Loblaws profits ahead of veterans and their families, and will he halt moving forward on this badly botched plan?
The Honourable Minister for Veterans Affairs.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And again, I'm surprised to receive the question from our honourable colleague. In fact, what we are doing is taking two contracts and putting it into one, making sure that we have 9,000 health professionals right across the country in 600 different areas in order to make sure that veterans can receive rehab services and health services in towns and cities and rural areas right across the country. We are not opposed to that. We want to provide the service for our veterans, and we will.
The honourable member for Calgary Rocky Ridge.
Well, Madam Speaker, this Liberal government offers Canadians more debt, more taxes, more spending, more inflation, and higher interest rates. Their out-of-control spending added $100 billion in debt before COVID, plus $205 billion in non-COVID debt, triggering an inflation crisis that leaves Canadians unable to afford basic necessities. When will the Liberals end their inflationary spending and cancel their plan to triple the tax on gas, groceries, and home heating?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister.
Madam Speaker, our government absolutely believes in compassion. And that's why I was happy to share at the beginning of this question period the good news that C31 has received royal assent. Struggling families will get $500 to pay their rent, and kids under 12 across the country will be able to go to the dentist. But I do also want to underscore for Canadians listening, our approach is fiscally responsible. Our AAA rating has been reaffirmed by Moody's with a stable outlook. We have the lowest deficit and the lowest debt to GDP.
The honourable member for Calgary Rocky Ridge.
Well, that answer, Madam Speaker, is cold comfort to the millions of Canadian families that are going to struggle to heat their homes this winter.
Right.
They said that inflation was transitory and that interest rates would never go up. Now interest rates and mortgage payments are through the roof, and millions of Canadians are going to struggle to make their payments. Canadians, they're also going to raise the payroll tax, and Madam Speaker, Canadians can't pay higher mortgage payments and a higher carbon tax with a smaller paycheck. When will they cancel these tax increases and inflationary spending?
Honourable Deputy Prime Minister.
Madam Speaker, I think the Conservatives should be a little bit cautious about purporting to offer advice on handling inflation to Canadians. After all, it was their leader who advised Canadians to invest in crypto as a way of opting out of inflation. Had Canadians done that, they would have lost 65% of their savings or being totally wiped out. I hope the Conservatives will apologize to Canadians for that reckless advice, Madam Speaker.
Honourable member for Sarnia-Lambton.
This from the woman who said that we'd have deflation and interest rates would remain low for decades. Madam Speaker, the highest inflation in 40 years means Canadians can't pay their bills. Yet this costly coalition continues their out-of-control tax and spend agenda. So will the Liberals have some compassion, end their inflationary spending, and cut their plan to triple taxes on gas, home heating, and groceries?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister.
Madam Speaker, we learned this week that inflation in Canada had been stable or fallen for 4 months in a row. That's good news.
Good news.
Now, Madam Speaker, we also recognize that we need to take a fiscally responsible approach. I discussed that in the previous answer. We know Canadians need compassion too, and that is why we are really glad to be able to be sending checks for for $500 to families who need it, and why we're glad to finally be able to say in Canada, families are not going to have to choose between buying groceries and taking their kids to the dentist.
The honourable member for Sarnia-Lambton.
That's the Liberals. Give a little with one hand, take a lot with the other. There's half of Canadians that cannot pay their bills. They've lost hope. This Liberal government is out of touch and Canadians are out of money. So again, I will ask, will the Liberals end their inflationary spending and cancel their plan to triple taxes on gas, groceries, and home heating?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister.
Madam Speaker, our government will take no lessons from the Conservatives when it comes to supporting the most vulnerable Canadians. It's our government that introduced the CCB. That is a policy that is indexed to inflation. It has lifted 2 million Canadians, 450,000 Canadian children out of poverty. That is good, important policy all Canadians can be proud of. And the GIS, also indexed to inflation, is helping 900,000 Canadian seniors.
Indeed.
Député de Chicoutimi-Le
The honourable member for Chicoutimi-Le-Fjord. Madam Speaker, people are skipping meals and going hungry because of the high cost of living. It sounds like I'm talking about people from other parts of the world, but no, I'm talking about Canadians in Canada, a G7 country. 671,000 Quebecers use food banks every month, and a third of them are children. The reasons are obvious: inflation and high food prices. Will this government stop impoverishing Canadian families and at least promise not to raise taxes? The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister. Madam Speaker, I couldn't agree more that the economic situation globally is difficult and that there are Canadians who are struggling. That's why they're struggling with affordability, and that's why I find it shocking that the Conservatives opposed two things that we're moving ahead with: the $500 for the most vulnerable who are having trouble paying their rent, and dental care for kids. Is there any justification for that position, Madam Speaker? The honourable member for Chicoutimi-Le-Fjord. Madam Speaker, dental care is one thing, but you need to have something to eat while you're at it. Prices for food, heating, and housing are not going down, and 1 in 2 people are food insecure. Men and women who get up every day and go to work are going hungry. That's what we've come to in Canada. We have working poor, not to mention kids going to school on an empty stomach. Can this government show some compassion and not raise the carbon tax so Canadians can survive and provide for their families? The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister. Madam Speaker, I think it's worthwhile recapping the Conservative plan and their approach. This is what they want to do. They want to gut the EI system. They want to jeopardize seniors' pensions. They want to make pollution free of charge. They want to leave kids with no dental care. They don't want that $500 going to people who are struggling to pay their rent. This is a problem, Madam Speaker.
Saint-Hyacinthe-Bagotte.
The honourable member for Saint-Hyacinthe-Bagotte. Madam Speaker, at COP27, the Canadian petro-monarchy wants to prevent the inclusion in the final report of a sentence on the importance of phasing out fossil fuels. Just one small sentence, not binding, but that's too much. Canada is coming to the rescue of the oil companies. Madam Speaker, there's no solution to climate change without reducing oil and gas production. It's either that or scrap the planet. So the Liberals are going to have to choose. Is the minister they sent to COP27 the Minister of the Environment or the Minister of Oil? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
As many members in this House know, we have the most ambitious climate plan in the history of Canada, a $9.1 billion emissions reduction plan that is as much an economic plan as it is an environmental plan, Madam Speaker. We are going to be eliminating fossil fuel subsidies, we are going to be capping oil and gas emissions, and we're going to be building the clean economy of tomorrow, Madam Speaker, a $2.5 trillion economy. We have to catch that wave, Madam Speaker.
Honorable député.
The honourable member for Saint-Hyacinthe-Bagotte. Madam Speaker, the only thing more infuriating than Canada's actions at COP27 is their excuses. Yesterday, when the government was asked why it kept on approving oil projects in the middle of a climate crisis, listen to this. They said a carbon-neutral world will always need oil, especially to oil the parliamentary secretary's bike. I just want to clarify. If they approved Bay du Nord and its billion barrels of oil and offshore oil exploration in Newfoundland, is that really all for the sake of greasing bicycle chains? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Madam Speaker, I want to be crystal clear here. I've said this before and I'll say it again. Even in a carbon-neutral world, there will still be a need for oil. There are things we will need oil for, not just bicycles, but also for windmills, to lubricate windmills. And if we want latex gloves in our hospitals, we will always need oil. And what we're going to do is cap emissions. That's what we're going to do. We have a plan and we are implementing it.
Member for St. Albert, Edmonton.
Madam Speaker, when the Prime Minister was briefed by CSIS that at least 11 candidates in the 2019 election illegally received hundreds of thousands of dollars from Beijing, violating multiple sections of the Canada Elections Act, the Prime Minister had a choice. He could report this illegal activity to Elections Canada so that they could investigate, or he could cover it up. What choice did the Prime Minister make?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And as I've said in this House previously, Canada's fair and free elections process was never, ever compromised. It's not just me saying that, Madam Speaker. This was determined by an independent panel of national security experts. Let's remember the only ones that benefit from foreign interference are enemies of democracy. I'm disappointed that the opposition for 5 days now has continued to amplify the foreign interference messaging in this House. We should be standing together to stand up to this attack on our democracy, Madam Speaker.
The Honourable Member for St. Albert, Edmonton.
Madam Speaker, after that non-answer for the third time to my straightforward question, the only conclusion that can be reasonably drawn is that the Prime Minister made no report to Elections Canada. The Prime Minister professes to be concerned about Beijing's interference in our elections, but when he had an opportunity to do something about it, to report the illegal activity to Elections Canada, he instead chose to cover it up. Why? What is the Prime Minister hiding?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Public Safety.
Madam Speaker, foreign interference is a threat to the fabric of our democracy. We will continue to invest in our intelligence agencies, in CSIS, to ensure that they have the resources they need to take action and ensure that they are protecting the interests of Canadians. But, Madam Speaker, all members of this House should be standing side by side and standing up against foreign interference and not implying things that were not said by the answers that are given. This is a problem for every member of this House. It's a problem for every Canadian. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Sturgeon River Parkland.
Well, Madam Speaker, it is a stain on our democracy, and every day that these Liberals refuse to be transparent about it, that stain continues to linger. The government knew that there were 11 candidates who received illegal foreign funds in the 2019 election. Now, the Liberals have repeatedly said that this is a threat to our democracy. We agree, but they refuse to give us the evidence. If the Liberals won't reveal the names to Parliament, will they at least confirm when and if the Prime Minister shared this information with the Commissioner for Elections Canada?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to just take a breath here and remember what is motivating foreign interference. Foreign interference is motivated by a desire to destroy the fabric of our democracy here in Canada. We are taking action by introducing legislation on cybersecurity. I hope that the honourable member who serves on the Public Safety Committee will assist our government in getting that legislation passed. We will always take democracy and protect Canadians seriously and take every action, including legislative action, to make sure that happens.
L'Honorable Député de Beauce.
The Honourable Member for Beauce. Thank you, Madam Speaker. In January, the Prime Minister was informed that 11 candidates had received illegal money from foreign actors, potentially influencing our elections. The government is refusing to release details of the campaigns involved and what they're going to do about it. It's simple, Madam Speaker. Did the Prime Minister report these allegations to the Commissioner of Elections? And if so, when? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
And this is the fourth question today. 5 days of questions on foreign interference, and the opposition seems not to recognize who is being attacked in these foreign interference. It's not this side of the House. It's not that side of the House. It's every single member in this House. It is meant to sow chaos. It is meant to destroy our democracy. We need to be standing together, Madam Speaker. I invite them to support cybersecurity legislation. I invite them to support the actions that other ministers have taken when it comes to mining and other actions our government is.
The honourable member for South Okanagan, West Kootenay.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Canada's graduate students and postdoctoral fellows are living in poverty because this government hasn't increased their wages in almost 20 years. This week, scientists were completely unimpressed when the minister tried to tell them that ongoing funding was new money. One Canada research chair even tweeted, "Just the same old investment with a shiny new bow." Madam Speaker, when will the Liberals stop pretending that they support science and increase the funding for Canada graduate scholarships and postgraduate fellowships?
Hear, hear.
The Honourable Minister.
Madam Speaker, I'd like to thank my colleague for his question. Actually, I think he attended the same conference. I didn't get the same feedback that he received, obviously, because I met with 1,000 people there in the room, which were there, and we obviously told the group what the investment this government has been done on science over the last few years. Madam Speaker, we agree with him that we need to do more for graduate students, for scientists and researchers. We want to promote science in this country, and I think if there's one government in Canadian history which has done a lot for science, it's this government, Madam Speaker, and it will continue to invest in science across our nation.
Absolutely. The honourable member for Vancouver East.
There are at least 500,000 non-status migrants doing essential work in Canada. They are caregivers, they work in healthcare and agriculture, and they work for poverty wages, long hours, and often in abusive conditions. Without status, they face the stress of deportation and lack access to basic healthcare and services. This government must provide them with permanent status so that they can live and work in Canada without exploitation and the risk of deportation. When will the Liberals act to grant undocumented migrants with permanent residency?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Prime Minister.
Madam Speaker, international students provide significant contributions to Canada, and we heard loud and clear their strong desire to continue staying here in this country and to work here. We've launched extensions of expired and expiring post-graduation work permits that will benefit nearly 100,000 people.
Hear, hear.
Madam Speaker, we've also listed the 20-hour work week rule so that almost 500,000 international students already here in Canada can continue to work while doing their studies. Madam Speaker, we are making sure that we are carving out a place for international students to better integrate into Canada.
Honourable member for Kitchener-Conestoga.
Madam Speaker, Global Entrepreneurship Week celebrates the millions of people worldwide who turn their business ideas into reality. The international event encourages entrepreneurs through a variety of activities and connects them with potential investors, support organizations, mentors, and partners to help them achieve their goals. As Global Entrepreneurship Week is coming to an end, can the Parliamentary Secretary of the Minister of International Trade, Export Promotion, Small Business and Economic Development tell this House how Canada celebrates and supports entrepreneurs? Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and I thank the member for his advocacy. This week, we celebrate Canadian entrepreneurs from across the country who are driving economic growth and creating good-paying jobs. We will continue to support entrepreneurs through the $4 billion Canada Digital Adoption Program, the $6 billion Women's Entrepreneurship Strategy, the Black Entrepreneurship Program that is breaking down barriers and supporting Black entrepreneurs to succeed. We are home to some of the brightest entrepreneurs in the world, in Kitchener-Conestoga and around the country, and we are committed to growing these entrepreneurs and their innovations. Merci.
The honourable member for Haliburton, Kawartha Lakes, Brock.
Speaker, this week the Auditor General released a scathing report on the complete failure at Indigenous Services Canada to provide support for First Nations disaster management. After 3 years and $790,000, the auditor found that not one emergency management agreement was completed. Wow. More and more parents now are waking up, trying to figure out how to heat their homes, pay their bills, even feed their families. When will this government actually start getting results for Indigenous people and stop their wasteful inflationary spending?
Great question.
The Honourable Minister for Indigenous Services.
Mr. Speaker, first of all, the extraordinary expense of responding to climate change crisis is growing. And in fact, the Auditor General's report noted that while Indigenous Services Canada is doing a great job helping emergency management of those crises, that we need to invest more in protection and in adaptation. And Mr. Speaker, it's really exciting to hear a member from the opposite talk about climate change and talk about the need to invest in adaptation, to reduce the emissions, to protect our climate, because in fact, all of us are suffering with an extraordinary expense responding to climate crises. We'll continue, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable member for Haliburton, Kawartha Lakes, Brock.
Thank you, Speaker. The Auditor General and the Parliamentary Budget Office did not say the Indigenous Services Department is doing a great job. In fact, they called it a money pit. Yeah. If the minister was actually truly going to fund projects, how about the 112 infrastructure projects that would build dikes, culverts, ditches to help mitigate the effects of climate change, instead of spending 3.5 times more relocating people, housing them, rebuilding the communities after the disaster hit? Mitigate this. When will the government start getting results for Indigenous people and stop wasting money?
Great question.
The Honourable Minister.
Madam Speaker, I don't consider it a waste of money to help a community that's under threat from flood or fire or from torrential winds. I don't consider that a waste of money at all, Madam Speaker. What I am hearing the member opposite call for is an increased investment in making our communities resilient from the effects of climate change. I'm really pleased to hear this question, Madam Speaker, because it's an indication that the opposition understands that communities are under intense threat from the kinds of incredible climate activity that we're seeing. We'll continue, Mr. Speaker, to work with communities to make those important investments.
The honourable member for Kenora.
Madam Speaker, fuel costs are up nearly 56% from last year. For those in Northern Ontario, that means they're struggling to afford to fill their gas tanks. It means that rising grocery bills are having many people cut back on their diets. And the rising cost of home heating has many, many people concerned about the upcoming winter months and how they're going to pay to even heat their homes. Madam Speaker, this is a crisis of this government's making, so when will the Liberals finally show some compassion, stop their inflationary spending, and cancel their plan to triple the taxes on gas?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister.
Madam Speaker, we absolutely recognize that times are really challenging for a lot of Canadian families, and we do believe that a compassionate approach is the right one. That's why I was really glad to be able to share with this House today the good news that Bill C-31 received royal assent. That means checks for $500 are going to go to nearly 2 million Canadian families to help them pay the rent. It means that no family ever again in Canada with a kid under 12 is going to have to choose between.
L'honorable député.
The Honourable Member for Bellechasse, Les Etchemins-Lévis. Good morning, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, Liberal inflation has troubling effects on vulnerable pregnant women who are experiencing food insecurity. According to OLO, an organization which gives food to these pregnant women, these expecting mothers, they prefer to go hungry to feed their other children, Madam Speaker. Why? Well, because food has become unaffordable. They have to make the difficult choice between the children at their table and their unborn children. So will this government commit to helping these mothers by cancelling its tax hikes, Madam Speaker? The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister. Madam Speaker, our government understands how important mothers are and how important families are. That's why, since 2015, since we took office, we have concentrated on helping mothers and families by helping them with what's most necessary. Thanks to the Canada Child Benefit, in fact, 450,000 children have been helped. The Honourable Member for Lac-Saint-Jean. Madam Speaker, the World Cup of Soccer starts on Sunday in Qatar. Qatar is a dictatorship that flouts human rights. The players have the right to compete, but Canada should not be diplomatically involved in rebranding Qatar at the cost of thousands of workers' lives. With just 2 days to go until the World Cup, the government is still unable to decide whether to send a delegation or not. It says it will decide in due course. Well, in due course would be now. It's in 2 days, and the place to make this decision is here in the House. Will the government send a diplomatic corps to Qatar? Yes or no?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Madam Speaker, we are very proud of the Canada national soccer team qualifying for the 2022 FIFA World Cup, which has many members from our community in Brampton. We are also very concerned about reports of dangerous working conditions in building the World Cup stadiums and infrastructure, especially those resulting in death. We join international partners in calling for transparency and robust measures to protect the health, safety, dignity, and human rights of all workers to ensure the tournament is a success. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Lac-Saint-Jean. That was not an answer. There was no answer. The government has known for 12 years that the World Cup would be held in Qatar. 12 years, and now it's in 2 days. Madam Speaker, the Bloc Québécois sincerely hopes that the government is not going to leave its values in the change room locker in the name of and in the exercise of diplomacy. Qatar is imprisoning LGBTQ+ people. Qatar tramples on women's rights. Qatar has sacrificed the lives of thousands of workers in order to build luxury hotels. Canada has no business there. We want an answer. Will they send a delegation to Qatar? Yes or no?
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Madam Speaker, as I said, we join international partners in calling for transparency and robust measures to protect the health, safety, dignity, and the human rights of all workers to ensure the tournament is a success. Madam Speaker, details on Government of Canada representation at the 2022 FIFA World Cup will be released in due course. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Coast of Bay Central Notre Dame.
Madam Speaker, lobsters 33 and 34 about to open in Nova Scotia waters. This coming season is going to be extremely challenging for fish harvesters. They have seen diesel, bait, and financing costs skyrocket while lobster prices have fallen drastically. Certainly the Minister is aware of these challenges. Will the Liberal government commit to opening the mackerel fishery to cut bait costs and allow stacking to let the fishermen save on fuel?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Fishing.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thanks to the member opposite for the question. As the member knows, Canada has a world-class lobster fishery with lobster that is sought across the globe. It's an industry that's important for Canada's economy, and that's thanks to our amazing harvesters and coastal communities. I will say this about mackerel, Madam Speaker, is that all of our decisions are based on a couple of factors. One is science, and one is also the ability to work with our harvesters hand in glove. That's what we're going to continue to do. We're going to listen to the harvesters, and then this side, we listen to science.
The Honourable Member for Chatham-Kent-Leamington.
A month ago, I asked this government to give Canadian families a break and cancel the tripling of the carbon tax that's applied to every step in the transportation of food production, processing, and manufacturing. The response from the Minister of the Environment: a carbon tax stops hurricanes. The reality is that the storms that we now face, there are many things that are outside our control, but one option that we do have control over is crippling taxation. Will the Minister support Canada's food security by immediately cancelling the tripling of the carbon tax?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Madam Speaker, families are at the very heart of what we are doing here as a government. Between 2015 and 2019, around 1.3 million Canadians were lifted out of poverty. We know there's more work to be done. That's why we're investing in dental. It's why we're investing in rental. It's why we invested in the Canada Child Benefit. It's why we're investing in childcare. On every single one of those items, Madam Speaker, the party opposite has voted against. We're standing on the side of families.
Honourable Member for New Brunswick Southwest.
Madam Speaker, whatever the Liberals touch, they break, and it's deja vu all over again.
The Auditor General has reported the Liberal government keeps wasting tax dollars. According to the Auditor, the Liberals are about to lose the legal authority to collect $500 million in wage overpayments from the Phoenix pay system. This is on top of the $2 billion the Liberals have already spent on overpayments to civil servants. What is the minister's plan to collect these overpayments to public servants and to finally protect taxpayers?
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and I appreciate the question from the member opposite. I think most of us in this House know that the Phoenix system has been very frustrating, of course, for our employees, and we are working very, very hard so that those employees are paid accurately and on time. And we recognize the stress and hardship for employees and their families, and we are committed to making this right. We prioritize cases that can have a large impact on the employee's pay, and we've made significant steps to help stabilize the Phoenix pay system, and we continue to work with all stakeholders, including unions and employees.
The Honourable Member for Sudbury. Madam Speaker, we all know that diversification of export markets for our agricultural products is crucial for the development of the sector, and that the Indo-Pacific region is an area with strong growth potential. Can the Minister of Agriculture and Agri-Food inform this House of the most recent initiative aimed at facilitating our agricultural exports to the Indo-Pacific region? The Honourable Minister for Agriculture and Agri-Food. Thank you, Madam Speaker. A few hours ago, the Prime Minister announced the creation of an Indo-Pacific Agriculture and Agri-Food Office. This is great news for our farmers and producers and for our exporters of excellent Canadian food. This team will be able to remove market access barriers, advance our trade policy objectives, and improve knowledge transfer to food systems and contribute to food safety around the world. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Churchill River.
Speaker, imagine people watching the answers this morning while having to choose between heating and eating in a cold Saskatchewan winter. Imagine ordering small amounts of heating fuel that lasts only a few days because you simply can't afford any more. Imagine the desperation. Suppliers are lowering their delivery thresholds, and they're compassionately extending credit to people knowing they may never get paid. Speaker, will this NDP Liberal coalition commit to ending their plan to triple the carbon tax on home heating fuel, gas, and groceries, or do they simply not care?
Honourable Deputy Prime Minister.
Madam Speaker, I think all of us are thinking about hardworking Canadian families today. And the families I'm thinking about are the families making $90,000 or less who, up until now, have had to make a tough choice between buying groceries and paying the rent or taking your kid to the dentist. And for those families, we have some relief today. Because what we're saying is you can take your kid under 12 to the dentist and you will get $650 to do it.
The Honourable Member for Regina West Canada.
Madam Speaker, according to Regina Food Bank CEO John Bailey, food bank use in Saskatchewan is up 37% this year.
Shame.
More and more fully employed working families are turning to food banks just to make ends meet. And with winter on the way and home heating costs set to rise, the problem will only get worse. Yeah. Madam Speaker, will the Liberals end their inflationary spending and cancel their plan to triple taxes on groceries, gas, and home heating?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister.
Madam Speaker, we absolutely agree that hardworking Canadian families need some support now. And that is why I am just astonished that the Conservatives opposed dental care for kids under 12. I am astonished that they opposed sending $500 to 2 million Canadian families struggling to pay their rent. But they do have a chance to do the right thing. Hardworking Canadian families do need help, and that's why we're enhancing the Canada Worker Benefit, $2,400 to a working family. I hope that...
The Honourable Member for Yellowhead.
Madam Speaker, this government continues to blame everyone else but themselves for the affordability crisis plaguing Canadians across the country. The NDP Liberals stay in luxurious $6,000 a night hotels and tell Canadians to cancel their Disney Plus subscriptions, as if saving $14 a month will afford groceries, gas, and home heating. Madam Speaker, when will this government stop the tax hikes and stop their inflationary spending already?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister.
Madam Speaker, I'd like to take this opportunity to talk about hard-working Canadians, unionized working Canadians. Our government believes in supporting them, and that's why one of the first things we did was repeal anti-worker Harper legislation, Bills C-377 and C-525. If the Conservatives really want to support Canadian working people, they should promise never again to put forward anti-worker legislation.
L'honorable député de Pontiac.
The honourable member for Pontiac.
Speaker, I also want to highlight the great news we received yesterday is that Bill C-31 received royal assent. Now, while the Conservatives oppose the bill and prevent kids from receiving affordable dental care this year, this government stood up for Canadian family and put forward real solution to make life more affordable. Solution, Madam Speaker, not slogan. Can the parliamentary secretary to the Minister of Health highlight how the government is delivering on dental care for Canadian family and also for family in my riding?
Secretary to the Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. It's a real honor and privilege to stand on behalf of the Minister of Health today and thank and congratulate the member from Pontiac for her hard work and advocacy, particularly for Canadians living in rural communities. Here. Indeed, Madam Speaker, with the royal assent of Bill C-31, over 500,000 kids will visit the dentist this and next year who don't have dental insurance and otherwise wouldn't have been able to visit the dentist. This is an affordability measure. This is a health care measure. This is how we take care of families on this side of the House, Madam Speaker. This will have positive impacts across this country, including for families right across the river in Pontiac.
Honourable member for Edmonton Strathcona.
Madam Speaker, over the past few weeks, the Liberal government has met several times with their Indian counterparts, but we've seen no statements from the government calling out the ongoing persecution of minorities in India, including Sikhs, Muslims, women, and other minority groups. The Indian government must respect the human rights of all Indian citizens, and Canada must call them out when those rights are denied. At a time when the Indo-Pacific region is becoming more important than ever, why is Canada remaining silent on the horrendous human rights abuses taking place in India?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Canada attaches great importance to the protection and promotion of human rights globally, including in India. Canada and India share many values, including a commitment to democracy and strong people-to-people ties. This provides a basis for frank and respectful dialogue on issues including human rights, which I have raised with which the Minister of Foreign Affairs has raised with their foreign counterpart. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This Sunday is World Children's Day. It's observed internationally. My constituent, Rafi, who many of you will know, is an advocate for children's rights and that Canada should be a child-honoring society. Yet the United Nations Committee on the Rights of the Child has repeatedly asked Canada to live up to the Convention on the Rights of the Child by putting in place an advocate at the national level or an ombudsman at the national level to advocate for children, their well-being and their rights. Can the government update us if there's been any progress in moving towards the creation of a national point person to advocate for our children?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Madam Speaker, I thank the member opposite for her question and tireless advocacy on behalf of children from coast to coast to coast. We are committed to protecting children's rights and providing the support they need to live up to their full potential. To support children, we introduced the Canada Child Benefit, which has lifted over 435 children out of poverty We are building a nationwide system of high-quality, affordable, flexible, and inclusive childcare, and we are consulting with Canadians on a national school food policy to help ensure children are well-nourished. And we are providing up to $1,300 over 2 years through a Canada Dental benefit for children under 12. We will keep listening to children as well as child and youth advocates, and we will continue to explore more options to incorporate a children's right lens into our policy making.
And that is all the time for oral questions. Je vois que l'honorable député de Richmond-Athabasca sa main levée. Est-ce que l'honorable député...
Does the honourable member have a point of order?